You're listening to Menopause Natural Solutions, episode 35, Flip Your Kitchen, an interview with nutritionist and chef Lisa Baker. Welcome to Menopause Natural Solutions, your podcast for all things perimenopause and menopause related. Stay tuned as naturopath Jennifer Harrington explains how to use natural therapies to transform your health and happiness. Welcome back, ladies. I'm your host, Jen, and today I'm joined by Lisa Baker. Lisa is a nutrition-based health coach. She's a self-published author, blogger, and woefully underpaid COO of a busy family of four. Adores her crazy life and brings her passion, knowledge, and experience to the table to help you love your life, no matter how crazy it is, and to reach your health goals.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I've been binge listening to your episodes.
Well, I'm so glad to have you here because we are so on the same path.
We really are. And I have a group of women that I have recommended your podcast to. We can talk about that later, but I have an online group of women who can really use the information you're sharing.
And vice versa.
Wonderful.
We're both really here to serve women in need, and the menopausal transition so is a time of need, but it's also a time of celebration.
Absolutely.
So one of the reasons why I really wanted to get you on the show today was because we have such similar values and similar goals, but we also come at it from a slightly different perspective. I started as a nutritionist who got interested in food and cooking, where you really started from the other way around as a chef.
I really did. Yep. We came at it from exactly the opposite direction.
So tell me more about your story.
So my story is that after leaving my first job, I decided that I was going to go back into food. And the more I worked as a waitress, the more I realized that I didn't want to be serving food. I wanted to be making it. And furthermore, I just didn't want to be doing it in a restaurant setting. And the more I cooked, the more I realized what I was about was helping people to eat food that is cooked from scratch, using whole, close to the source ingredients. And from that point, I actually had a catering and private chefing business for a while. And then we had kids, and those things don't really go together that well, because your clients want you nights, weekends, and holidays when your kids want you. So I switched to just walking away from catering and doing all kinds of administrative work. And then I ended up deciding to go back to cooking and food from a social justice angle, and worked in nonprofits for a while. And then I became certified as a health coach because I was teaching cooking classes on the side, and realized that while food is very important to our health, there's so many other things that really affect our health. And so my tagline is actually, it's the food and it's more than the food. So a lot of women come to me because they think they need to fix what they're eating. They need to, quote unquote, fix their diet. And usually I do 12 sessions with them over about 6 months. And I realized that, after about 2 sessions, it's never about the food. It's about their relationship with food. So I really came from food into coaching in a more holistic sense.
I really like that. I think that is fabulous because it is so true that what you put into your mouth is more about how you're feeling on that day and how you're coping with life in general. So I love that you're taking it from that angle. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's really true. I always say that we start out talking about food and we always end up talking about your relationship with food. And it's going to sound strange to say this because a lot of people feel very out of control around their food. But what I mean when I say that everything leaks into your relationship with food, is that when we feel out of control in our relationship or our career, our physical activity or lack thereof, our spiritual practice or lack thereof, we look for a way to fix it quickly and instantly. And the easiest way to do that is with food, whether we're controlling what we eat or we're getting out of control with what we eat. It's really about how, like you said, how we're feeling on that particular day about other things in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Now, you have a cookbook, Flip Your Kitchen, part-time cookbook, part-time cooking class, part-time management coach.
That's right. Does a lot of things, that one book.
It's such a beautiful book. I love the pictures.
Thank you. I'm so proud and happy about this book, because in a way it was sort of my goodbye to the strictly cooking class only part of my business. And I really wanted to sort of wrap it up, put a bow on it. And it just was a really, really fun project. And it's a great example also when I talk to my clients about how the sort of energy they're feeling around a certain activity, because publishing a book is not an easy process. And on the other hand, this book just felt like a walk in the park all the time. Like every time I got to the next stage and I thought, oh, I should think about photographs, a photographer showed up. And then when I was at the point where I needed layout, a designer showed up, and when I needed a printer showed up. And it just felt like the most amazing sort of universe given flow that I'd ever experienced. Yeah, it just felt like, oh, that's really meant to be. And so it's this wonderful example I can give when I work with people. I'm like, wow, does this really feel like an effort? Are you feeling like you're pushing a boulder up a hill, or is everything falling into place? Because somehow we get this idea that things should be difficult. Anything that's worth it is difficult. And I like to say it's actually the reverse of that. When you can flow into something, it's much, much more valuable.
A concept that I know you talk about is soul food. Did you want to explain that?
Sure. So the book is very much about soul food, spelled SOLE. And as we started talking about, I really try to get people back into the kitchen, cooking from scratch, using whole food ingredients. And we are all sort of on a different place in our food journey. Some people are eating mostly or 100% highly processed ingredients. And those are the people that I just try to sort of gently lead by the hand and say, okay, let's try to make something using no mixes or bags or boxes or things like that. And very gradually get them to a point where they're cooking using whole ingredients. And that's really the first step. The soul food part of the equation is really up-leveling it. There's been in America a huge movement about seasonal eating, organic food, eating local. So those are the first three letters: seasonal, organic, and local. And the last letter, the E, stands for ethical. And it really is a sort of up-leveling of your diet to the next stage, which is once you're eating whole foods, let's look at how else you can increase the nutritional value of that food. And it's just my own experience even that when I started converting my family's diet to a seasonal diet, we suddenly noticed like, wow, we're not getting sick. Our kids would catch a cold and a day later they'd be better. And you'd see these other kids who, they get sick and they're out for a week from school. And I just kept noticing that our immune systems got better and better and better. The organic part, I think a lot of people will argue this still, that organic is just a way for the companies to make money, and there really isn't evidence that it works and that it's more important. I definitely fall firmly on the side of organic when you can afford it. And
I had spoken about the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen in the past.
Yes, EWG. We love the Environmental Working Group. They're wonderful, wonderful list. If you go on their website, ewg.org, they have great lists of, so you want to eat organic, but you're on a tight budget. Here are the things where you really ought to make an effort to buy organic if possible.
Strawberries. Top of the list.
Peaches. Yes, all the really delicious stuff. Although things like celery are also extremely high in toxins that are retained. If you look at the list, it's most often fruits and vegetables that have a very high water content. And they really suck up toxins from the environment. So, I totally understand that the science can be argued on both sides. And I would say one thing to be very careful of is if you're looking at a study that says, organic is good for you or organic is not any different, look at who's sponsoring the study, because very often that's going to be your key as to, who's going to benefit from this research coming out. A prime example of that is also eating dairy. Some people say dairy is terrible for you, and others will say dairy's not that bad for you if you're buying, raw, unpasteurized, unhomogenized, whatever milk. It's not. There's this whole discussion about dairy, and a few years ago, a study came out that said, fermented dairy is actually really good for you. And it's great. I would not argue most of it, but you get to the very bottom and you discover that the people who sponsored the study are a huge, very well-known yogurt company.
No surprises there.
No surprises there. Yep. So, and there's also been a really big eat local movement in recent years. And I think the beauty of eating local is, first of all, that it's seasonal. You also get to do what Michael Pollan calls shake the hand that feeds you. So if you're buying directly from a farmer, and you meet them at a market, you can ask them questions about their food. They love to give you recipes for them, and here's the best way to cook it and things like that.
I think I told you that I live across the road from a farmer's market.
Yes.
And one of the farmers there actually does camping. So you can go and do a camp stay on the farm.
Oh, fun. Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. So, and it's just, for me, the added value there is that you're building community as well. You're getting out, you're meeting people in your community, connecting with them, talking about what matters to them. And I think that's something that we're really losing in today's world. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, what about the nutritional aspect of actually the food being picked ripe rather than unripe, artificially ripened and cold storage and transported and
Right. What I love about local produce in particular is that when I buy, especially fruit locally, and I store it on the countertop, it lasts a week, 2 weeks, and very often when you buy produce at the grocery store, it won't last as long. So my feeling is definitely, you're saving money for one thing, and you're also supporting your local farmer and your local economy. And I think the final step in soul food, so we have seasonal, organic, local, and ethical. Ethical is something we don't think about very often, but it follows very closely upon that idea of building community and knowing where your food is coming from. So for me, the ethical question is really, everybody who touched your food on its way to your plate, who are those people? What are their lives like? Can they afford to feed their families the food that you're purchasing? Because sometimes you'll buy something, and if you trace back, you'll realize that the person who produced this food for you can't even afford to feed their families. And that's, I think, where we get into a discussion of food energetics, which is, everybody who touches your food on the way to the plate is putting their energy into it. I really firmly believe that. It's sort of like when you have a home cooked meal that someone has spent a lot of time on, it tastes so much better than what you threw together really fast because everybody was hungry at the end of the day. So I think there's a lot to be said for the ethics behind our food, and that leads right into the discussion of food energetics. So I don't know if you want to go down that path.
No, I'm very happy to go down that path. That's why, so like, that's why people pray before they eat. It's people
Yes.
bless their food. Yeah, I think it's a
Yeah.
big component.
Yeah, and in America, we just celebrated Thanksgiving, and a lot of people are sort of in the habit of saying grace. If they don't say it during the year, they might say it at Thanksgiving, and it's very standard. Sort of, we're thanking God, or we're going around the room and we're saying what we're thankful for. And a tradition that we've started at my house is let's go around the table and thank everybody who brought us this food. Like, who else can you think of? So there's always the person who planted it, the person who weeded the garden, who picked the produce, who packed it, who transported it. There's the pollinators. So who else is in your food web that you really could spend some time being grateful to and wishing them the same abundance that we have.
That is beautiful.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to steal that from you.
Oh, feel free. Yes. And it's a really great exercise to do, especially with kids around the table, because they'll come up with something that you won't think of.
Yeah, think the sun and the water and the moon.
Yes, the air, the water, the earth, that whole sort of Native American, indigenous, father, son, and mother moon, and grandmother moon, and I always get this wrong. Mother Earth, Father Sun, Grandmother Moon, all these natural parts that we don't normally think about are also to be thanked for the food that we have.
Thank you, Liza. That has made my day. I'm going to definitely start doing that with the family.
Yeah, it's a really great exercise. Makes you much more mindful of what you're putting in your mouth.
We were going to have a chat about whole food nutrition.
Yes, whole food nutrition. I think that probably that's really, as I was talking about at the beginning, when I start to work with clients, very often, a lot of them are on this, what I call the whole food spectrum, which is at one end you have an apple, and at the other end you have an apple flavored hard candy. And in between, you have all these other things. So to be honest, some of those apple flavored hard candies don't even have anything to do with a real apple, but just for argument's sake. So what I do is people who are eating the apple flavored candies, I always ask them to take one small step towards the whole apple. So that could be, maybe drinking a glass of 100% apple juice. And then if you want to take it one more step, let's talk about just plain apple cider, not even processed, not filtered, anything like that. The next step would be something like a cooked applesauce with sugar added. And then the next step is applesauce, no sugar added. And then the step before that could be, a peeled apple. And the most whole food that you can get in terms of apples is you pick an apple off a tree and you eat it. Now, of course, you probably want to wash it, but in terms of processing, that's pretty unprocessed. So when I talk to people about whole food nutrition, I always like to say, think about how this food shows up in nature and what is the minimum thing that you need to do to eat it. So when you think about something like oats, for example, we're very used to oatmeal, and we eat in this country a lot of those instant oatmeal packets. And if you were to read the ingredients on that, you'd realize that the oats have been highly, highly processed, lots of sugar added, probably some preservatives, probably some artificial flavorings, things like that. And as you work your way back towards nature, you would have something like rolled oats that you cook from scratch instead of the instant packet. And before that, you would have something like a steel-cut oats. They're not quite as processed as rolled oats. And before that is the actual oat groat, which looks, if you've ever seen it, looks kind of like a grain of rice. And it's really sort of the minimally processed version of oats. You wouldn't want to go much farther back than that because you don't want to be eating the husk from the grain. So, the minimum is you need to remove that husk. And then you have the grain that you can eat. So it's always looking at, what does this food look like in nature, and what's the closest I can get to that?
Yeah, so basically, if you don't recognize it as a food, it's processed.
Yes. Well, Michael Pollan says, if your grandmother wouldn't recognize it as a food, don't eat it. And I think at this point we're sort of to the great grandmother stage. But it's
sad.
It is sad. Something I do a lot with clients is learn how to read labels. And I also say, if you're looking for a whole food, it probably shouldn't even have a label. So when you buy things like dried beans in bulk, grain in bulk, produce, meat has to have a label if it's packaged, that kind of thing. But really, the things that don't have labels, nutrition fact labels, are really the things that we should be eating. The other kind of fun exercise is people want to know, is this food good for me? And they turn it over and they look at the label, and I say, well, read the ingredients. And, they'll read through it, and there'll be some kind of, chemical name in there. And my rule is really like, is that a chemical that you could go to the grocery store and buy? Because, there are things like fruit pectin that you can buy if you want to preserve, make preserves or something like that. That's available in the grocery store. But there are a lot of chemical additives and fillers that you don't have access to in a grocery store. And if you don't have access to it in the grocery store, it's probably not something you should put in your body.
True.
So
and if you can't pronounce it, is another way.
Yeah.
You can't pronounce it, don't put it in your mouth.
Exactly. If you cannot pronounce that word, then don't put that food in your mouth. A lot of those things are preservatives. And I like to joke that, the longer the shelf life of the food, the shorter that food is going to make your lifespan.
Do you know The Chemical Maze? It's a book and it's also an app.
No.
The Chemical Maze, I've got the book. I've got a little pocket book, but there's a desktop book, and there's an app you can get on your phone, which actually explains what all the numbers and all the longer ingredients are. So it's something that you can actually take to the shop with you. If you're looking at something, you can look it up and just figure out how good or bad it actually is. And most of the time, it will freak you out that you've been putting that in your mouth.
I
Or
hope
that you've been putting it in your children's mouth.
Yes. I hope it's as bad as reading the possible side effects on medication.
No, it's so easy to use because you've got three faces. And if you've got smiley faces, you're good. If you've got neutral faces, they're probably
use with caution. Proceed with caution.
Smiley face. Yay!
Yay! Do it. Eat it.
Yeah.
Chemical Maze. I'll have to look that up. Oh, that will be a good resource for clients too.
It's an oldie but a goodie. It's probably 20 years old now, but it gets updated. So maybe I need to get moved from the book to the app.
Yeah, maybe it's time.
Something that you and I have spoken about previously was looking at the quality, not the quality of food, but the heat of the food, the cold of food. Sorry, I've forgotten what the word was.
Yes, so food energetics. And I touched on it briefly when I was talking about the ethics of food, like what sort of energy is going into your food from the human component. The concept of food energetics comes to us from traditional Chinese medicine. And it's a really fascinating field where if you speak to a practitioner of Chinese medicine, you'll come to understand that Chinese practitioners look at foods literally as medicine. So every food has specific qualities, and the most common ones are: does this food dry you out, or does it promote dampness? Which sounds kind of weird, but those are the words that they use. Does this
food would certainly want to be avoiding foods that dry us up at this time of life?
Yes, exactly. Does this food cause heat in your body, or does it reduce heat in your body? Is it a cooling food or a heating food? And this is not something that's very intuitive. You cannot look at a food or taste a food and just know what it is. So, for example, a spicy food is not necessarily a heating food. But we like to joke at my house that our dog is plumb out of luck because dog meat is considered a heating food, and black dogs are supposed to be the most heating, the best kind for you. So every food has a temperature to it. It has a measure of moisture or dryness to it. It also has an energy. And if you know anything about Chinese philosophy about yin yang, where yin is the feminine energy, sort of the dark side of the moon kind of energy. It's a contracting kind of energy, whereas the yang is very male, very expansive, very bright sort of energy. And so when you go to see a Chinese medicine practitioner, they will do a bunch of things. One of them is to take your pulse in various parts of your body. One of them is to look at your tongue, because they can tell a lot about your health from what your tongue looks like. And they have, their own sort of assessment tools. And based on their assessment of you, they will tell you what sort of foods you might want to consider increasing in your diet and what sort of foods you may want to reduce. And of course, there's a huge herbal component to Chinese medicine, and acupuncture and cupping and all kinds of things like that. But sort of the basics that I pull out of food energetics for people are when you start looking at what foods are associated with what parts of your body in Chinese medicine, it's rather startling because, for example, our brains need fat to function. And, our nervous system needs beneficial fat to work properly. And when you look at a walnut, which happens to have an incredible amount of really beneficial fat in it, it looks kind of like your brain. And if you look at a kidney bean, guess what kidney beans are particularly good for? Your kidneys. And the other things that we look at are dark leafy greens, for example. If you look at a leaf of kale, you'll see that it has all these veins and arteries on it, really. And dark leafy greens are really good for detoxing, for cleaning out your blood, your liver, and the
carrots
other
and your
carrots.
eyes.
Yes, well, this is interesting because root vegetables are mostly sort of the deep orange sweet vegetables, and what root vegetables do is they sit under the ground and they just suck up all the nutrition they possibly can. So when you think about I was talking about the type of energy a food has, you think about a leafy green, we associate, spring with, things bursting up above the ground, and it's this rising energy. And so that's associated with the top half of your body. So when you think about root vegetables, the root vegetables are associated with the lower half of your body, and they have a very sort of contracting energy. So you think about, leaves grow above the ground and they expand. It's a very expansive sort of food, and root vegetables actually contract the energy and concentrate it. So when I work with clients, we sometimes play around with that, just experimenting really, and saying, if you're feeling a little bit down, if you're feeling sort of contracted and turned in on yourself, try adding more leafy greens to your diet. And what happens? And I've had clients who say, I practically get a high out of eating green leafy vegetables now. And if I go a day without them, I feel it. I feel down. I feel depressed. And other people who are sort of all over the place, and whether they're diagnosed or not, attention deficit disorder, that sort of bouncing off the walls kind of energy, I very often say, try incorporating some root vegetables into your diet on a regular basis. Like, have something from the root vegetable family every day and see whether you can't notice, are you getting more grounded? Are you feeling more centered, a little less flighty, a little less flaky?
I haven't heard that before, but it makes so much sense the way you explain it.
Well, traditional Chinese medicine is this enormous field that you have to study for years to become even marginally certified in some of these things. But the more reading I do about it, the more I think, oh, this makes so much sense. And
they've
in some ways,
perfected it. Like it's been going on for how many generations? So many.
Yes, not just centuries, but millennia, really.
Yeah, tweak and change,
there's
and
so much wisdom in there that we've kind of turned our backs on or just ignored. And it's very funny. My husband is from China, and his parents have sort of fallen on, one on each side of the spectrum. His father just does not believe in Chinese medicine at all, and believes firmly in Western style medicine, and his mother sort of takes the other path and says, well, there's something to Chinese medicine, but there's that struggle even in China now.
Wow.
It's a fascinating
quite
subject.
Interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah. There are some people in America who have really undertaken the study of it. And if you just Google food energetics, you'll come up with some really interesting articles. I can't remember the name of the man who actually sort of started the whole movement in America, but there's been a lot of contemporary people who've been studying.
Looks like I've got some research in front of me.
Yes, and it also has, in some ways, it really has ties to Ayurveda, which is also, very food-based.
And traditional and old.
Yeah, and you find out what kind of, what's your I can't, dosha, I think is the word for
Correct.
it. What is your for lack of a better word, personality type, and basing your food on that and seeing whether you can't become a little more balanced. If you're particularly lethargic and slow moving, is there some way you can sort of speed things up using food, and the opposite? So I think they're all related and all very old and very wise.
Yes. When we were talking about your wonderful book, Flip Your Kitchen, you mentioned before that you were happy to give a coupon or a discount to the listeners. Did you want to explain that?
Absolutely. So if your listeners go to my website, which is simplyhealthcoaching.com, and I actually now own both domains, so whether you put in the hyphen after simply or not, it'll get you there. So simplyhealthcoaching.com. And you go to the shop page, you can find my cookbook there. And if you use the coupon code podcast, it'll give you 20% off.
Yay! Thank you so much. That's very generous. I'm sure many women would like to take you up on that because you're just so knowledgeable.
Yeah, well, the book is fun, and like I said, it really is about getting you back into the kitchen, cooking from scratch. It's not a sort of fad diet kind of book. I offer a lot of variations. So if you're gluten-free, there are ways to tweak it. Some of the recipes, there's some dairy-free variations. And I put those in mostly because my daughter observes those restrictions. But it's really a book about let's get back into the kitchen and cook from scratch on a regular basis. And it introduces a meal planning system that you can also get more information about, where what I try to do is to show people that it might feel really overwhelming to think about cooking every night, but when we were, when our kids were young and we both worked full time, more than full time sometimes, we committed very early on to cooking and eating at home. And it really is possible to put 21 meals a week from scratch on the table if you learn how to meal plan and if you stop going to Instagram and Pinterest. Because I think we tend to go there and think, oh, everything has to look like this. But my book is really based on the idea that, if you're a fan of food shows, watch them as entertainment. They are not teaching you how to cook. They are entertaining you. So it's really a book meant to help people learn how to cook from scratch. And what I did was I took the culinary school curriculum and I repackaged it for the home cook. So you'll learn some really interesting tips in there that you generally don't learn in a cookbook unless you remember the old 1950s Betty Crocker. but there's a lot of information there about how to make substitutions and variations that you can try. And my husband always laughs at my book because he says, you've got a serious marketing problem. You're writing a cookbook to help people not have to use recipes. But that's the ultimate goal. I have lots of recipes and they act more like a formula rather than you have to have these ingredients. Is like when you think about something like a salad dressing, I'll say, here's the formula for it. Now you can use any kind of acid, whether it's lemon juice or orange juice or grapefruit juice or lime or vinegar or whatever you want to use for an acid. And then you have all these choices of oils. You could use walnut, walnut or avocado or olive oil. And it really is a way to teach you like, oh, you can make a vinaigrette with anything as long as you have an acid and an oil.
And that really is the ultimate empowerment.
It really is. That's what I'm trying to do, is to empower people, because I think we've become very disempowered in the kitchen. That's a whole different conversation. I can give you some very scary statistics in another conversation about that. But yeah, there's just, we've stopped cooking, and what I'm loving though is that I see more and more young people wanting to learn how to cook. So I think there was a generation that was just kind of like, oh, I don't have to cook. Food is everywhere and it's plentiful and it's cheap. And now people are kind of like, ooh, cooking is kind of fun when you have time.
Yeah. I'm not quite at an empty nest yet. I've got a teenage daughter at home, and it's one of my things that she has to know how to cook before she leaves the house.
Bless you, Mom.
Yeah. And she currently cooks 1 or 2 nights a week for me.
Excellent. Well, she needs this book when she moves out on her own.
Well, she won't need it because she'll already be cooking. But yes,
this is true.
It might help her now. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So bringing it back to the podcast topic, which is the menopausal transition. Now, I know you've already made it out the other end. So what do you think has been the best part of your menopausal transition?
Oh my goodness. Well, where to begin? It's just wonderful. I tell so many people, I'm like, oh, the view from this side of 50 is so much better. There are a lot of women, I think, who really struggle with the perimenopausal stage and the menopausal transition. And I love what you said when you started this session, which was that, in a lot of places and in a lot of ways, it's really a time of celebration. Or it could be. And I think that's a big key to it. It's interesting that when you think about the other end of our reproductive years, which is, going through puberty, a lot of cultures celebrate that. There's bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs and first period parties and, whatever. And nobody ever questions it. They say, oh yeah, you'll have acne and whatever, but isn't it great? And your body is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
But when we get to this side, all of a sudden we're broken, we're useless, we're old, nobody needs us anymore. Our bodies are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. We need to fix them. Oh my gosh. And I think that's one place where we really need to make a shift so that women can realize that, this is exactly what my body is supposed to be doing right now. And yes, it may be uncomfortable for a few years, but like I said, the view from the other side is so great. And for me, I think probably the biggest discovery is reaching a stage where I'm claiming the time and space for myself. Like, it is now my turn. I have taken care of my spouse's needs and my children's needs. And now is the time where I get to say, what is it that I want to be doing? And actually having the time to do it, rather than looking at all these things I want to do and realizing like, oh, that's not going to happen while I have kids. So I would say that definitely the best part of the transition for me was getting to the point where not only do I have the time to devote to what I want to do, but I also have that ability to say, you know what, it's about me right now, and I'm drawing this boundary, and I can't do this for you right now.
There we go, ladies. You hear from me, who I'm in my perimenopausal transition, and I say it's something to embrace. It's something to get excited about. But here we go. We have Lisa, who's actually made it out the other end, saying it's
made it out the other end. Yes.
Woo-hoo. You deserve a
and I think really that's the key.
I made it.
Yeah, I made it. And really it's all about realizing that you're not broken. You really aren't. Your body is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. And if you're having a lot of symptoms, there are ways to make those symptoms less. Some people get through it without even blinking. And why is that? So take a look at those people and what are they doing differently? It could be something as simple as changing the foods that you eat. It could be something like a nutritional deficiency that you, Jen, could help with. It could be, maybe looking at stress relief or getting acupuncture, whatever. But there's so many ways to find relief for symptoms rather than immediately just trying to slap a Band-Aid on them.
And if what you're doing is not working, try something else. There are so many different options, which is one of the reasons why I started the podcast, is a lot of women go, oh, this must be the beginning of menopause. I'm going to get on HRT. That is an option, but it should be one of the later options, not one of the earlier options.
Yeah, and it should be a really well-educated option that, people look at all of their options before they decide. But in America anyway, it's a little distressing because very often, I'm sure you have talked about this on the podcast, but anxiety is a big part of this process for a lot of women. And
it was my first symptom.
Yes, me too. And I am not an anxious person, but I had a full-blown panic attack and I just thought, what the heck is this about? And then after that, it was like anger and irritability. And I'm like, I'm not an angry person. Why am I lashing out at everybody? But, if you go to a doctor here, very often they're like, oh, you just need a Xanax. I'm like, it's not a Xanax deficiency.
It's certainly not.
So yes, I'm not going to deny that to anybody who really needs it. And there are a lot of other options out there. So I think
Xanax is a Band-Aid.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's a Band-Aid. Yeah. So looking at root causes is so important. And I know that's what you do as an ND, which is really like, let's help you with your symptoms, but at the same time, let's find the origin of those symptoms.
Man, I've loved having you on the show today.
Well, I've loved being here.
It's been such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope we can get you back again.
Yes, let's do it again.
Yay. All right. Well, thank you. And guys, I'll see you next week. Bye. Thank you for listening to Menopause Natural Solutions. This podcast contains general information about menopause. It is provided as a guide and is not intended to replace medical advice. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibilities for statements made by guests.